It was a Thursday morning, gray and soft with spring drizzle, when I realized I hadn't heard from Amanda in 2 days. Not a text, not a call, not even a seen message on Instagram. That wasn't entirely unusual. We both had jobs that demanded our attention, and she'd been buried in wedding details for weeks. But something in my gut twisted differently this time. Still, I told myself she was probably exhausted from the florist appointment and still annoyed about the cake tasting that went disastrously wrong. I didn't panic, not yet. By Saturday, I had called her 12 times. Her phone rang, went to voicemail. I checked with her sister, Natalie, who gave me a hesitant, "I'm sure she's fine," and then changed the subject to her cat's surgery. Her tone was awkward, heavy with something I couldn't name. I called her again that night after pacing for 2 hours in my apartment, staring at our engagement photo in its silver frame. She didn't answer. Her last text was 4 days old. Now, picking up my veil, don't forget to confirm with the band, XO. There was a heart emoji. It mocked me every time I reread it. By Sunday, I was no longer just concerned. I was sick. I hadn't slept, barely eaten. And when I walked past our reserved venue, the Langford House, a historic estate tucked into the hills like something out of a dream, I had to pull over and vomit on the side of the road. My stomach churned with dread. There were 143 guests confirmed. The florist had already started crafting the centerpieces. My mother had bought a new navy gown for the ceremony and the reception. Amanda's dress was hanging somewhere in her closet, untouched and waiting. And I was standing in the rain, trying to find a trace of the woman I was supposed to marry. I drove to her apartment that afternoon, even though I knew she hated surprises. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. I called the landlord, who'd known both of us by name for over a year, and he let me in reluctantly. Her apartment was clean. Too clean. The framed pictures on her bookshelf were gone. Her yoga mat, always rolled out in the corner, wasn't there. Her coffee mug, the chipped blue one she'd used every morning, was missing from the dish rack. Her clothes were gone. Her suitcase was gone. The place didn't look like someone preparing for a wedding. It looked like someone who had planned their exit. That night I sat in the dark on my living room floor, staring at our wedding invitations. I picked one up. I'd chosen the font myself, gold cursive with little embossed doves. I held it in, my hands like a dead thing. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it so quickly I knocked over a lamp. It wasn't her. It was my best man, Kyle. He asked if everything was okay. I lied. I said Amanda was sick and resting. He offered to come by. I declined. I didn't cry until the next morning. I'd spent the entire night reading every old message between us. The jokes, the pet names, the planning spreadsheets, the late night "I miss you" notes from when she was on a business trip in Chicago. None of it made sense now. I couldn't find a single clue, not a crack in the foundation, not a sign that she was unhappy. And yet she was gone. The woman I loved had disappeared, and all she left behind was silence. I emailed the caterer that afternoon. It was a strange, numb task, typing out confirmation details for a wedding I no longer knew was real. I considered canceling it. Then I remembered the contract. I remembered the cost. I remembered Amanda's insistence on signature cocktails, the lamb chops, the charcuterie tower. It totaled nearly $9,000. I stared at that number until it blurred. And then, for reasons I didn't understand yet, I kept the date. I told them to proceed as planned. 2 more days passed. Still no word from Amanda. I tried her parents. No answer. I sent an email to her office. A reply bounced back. "This address is no longer in use." The HR department wouldn't tell me anything. I Googled her. I checked obituaries. I even searched police records. Nothing. It was like she had never existed. On the 10th day, I called my mother and told her the wedding might not be happening. Her voice cracked when she asked why. I told her I didn't know. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Come home for dinner." I did. I hadn't eaten properly in days, and her kitchen smelled like stew and warm bread. I cried again, over her kitchen table, like I was 5 years old and had just scraped my knee. The day after that, I received a postcard in the mail. No return address, no message, just a photo of a beach I couldn't recognize. The handwriting on the address was hers. My heart exploded in confusion and rage. It was like she was taunting me, like she wanted me to know she was alive, but not where or why. And that was when something inside me hardened. I opened my laptop. I logged into the wedding spreadsheet. I went straight to the budget tab. I looked at every item she had insisted on, every non-refundable deposit she had authorized. I calculated how much of it I'd paid for. Then I opened a new tab, and I drafted an invoice. It wasn't petty. It was precise. I listed the catering, the DJ, the photographer, the flowers, the vintage car, the chair sashes. I tallied it all up. Then I emailed it to the last address I had for her. Subject line: "Since you disappeared." The night after I sent the invoice, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the dim light of my bedroom, the air too thick to breathe properly, feeling the sour taste of resentment bloom on my tongue. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing at my phone, half hoping, half dreading a response, something, anything, that would explain why she had torn through my life like a hurricane and left me bleeding in the wreckage. But the phone stayed cold and dark. By morning, I checked my email again, my heart hammering so loud it was all I could hear. There was no reply, only a few junk emails and a newsletter from a men's health site I didn't remember subscribing to. I deleted them all with a savage stab of my finger against the mouse. Then I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred and I saw double. The emptiness in my inbox mocked me, sharp as knives. The catering company called later that day to confirm the final menu selections. I almost told them to cancel. The words were right there, thick in my throat. But when I pictured Amanda's laughing face, all bright eyes and soft promises, I felt the hot wave of anger rise again. No, I wasn't going to be the one to fold under the weight of her betrayal. She had started this. She could finish it. I told the caterer to proceed. I said I would be there to sign off on everything in person. I hung up and felt something shift inside me. Something dangerous and cold and necessary. The following days blurred into each other. Every morning I woke up with a tiny sliver of hope that maybe she would call, that maybe there would be an explanation so wild and urgent that it could patch the hole she had punched through my chest. But hope is a stupid, stubborn thing. It clung to me even as reality slapped me again and again. Some guests started reaching out. Texts trickled in, tentative and confused. "Hey, is everything still on? Just confirming for the rehearsal dinner. Should I still book the hotel? Is Amanda okay?" I didn't know how to answer them. I didn't have words big enough or empty enough to explain what had happened. So I stopped answering altogether. I turned my phone to silent. I left the texts to rot in my notifications like dying things. The hardest call came from Amanda's maid of honor, Sarah. She sounded terrified when I picked up. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice breaking mid-sentence. "I haven't heard from her. None of us have. What is going on, Liam?" There was a long, brutal silence as I realized I was hearing genuine fear, not just for the wedding, but for Amanda herself. "She's gone," I said finally, the words tasting like rust and heartbreak. "I don't know where." Sarah sobbed once, sharp and wet, then hung up without saying goodbye. The rehearsal dinner came and went. I sat alone at the long table reserved for 20 people, staring at the untouched glasses, the polished silverware, the little white cards with everyone's names printed in gold. The servers circled like ghosts, pity and confusion written all over their faces. I drank too much that night. Way too much. Bourbon, then scotch, then something blue and sugary that the bartender gave me out of pure mercy. I stumbled back to my apartment under a haze of streetlights and shame. The postcard Amanda had sent was still on my fridge, pinned there like a sick trophy. I tore it down and threw it into the trash with a savagery that startled even me. The wedding day dawned gray and wet, just like the day I'd first realized she was missing. I woke up on my couch, still wearing my dress shirt from the night before, sticky with spilled alcohol and sweat. I should have canceled everything. I should have pulled the plug, but I didn't. I showered, I shaved. I put on the suit that had cost more than my first car. I straightened the tie Amanda had picked out. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me, hollow-eyed, gaunt, furious. I drove to the Langford house in silence, the roads slick and gleaming under a steady rain. The valet looked confused when I handed him the keys, but he didn't ask questions. Inside, the venue was breathtaking. Flowers everywhere, peonies, hydrangeas, delicate vines wrapped around the columns. The scent was sweet and oppressive. The string quartet played softly in the corner, oblivious to the fact that their audience consisted of exactly one man. Me. I stood there in the empty hall, listening to the music swell and fall, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. I waited for 2 hours. Not a single guest showed up. Maybe word had gotten out. Maybe Sarah had told them. Maybe Amanda herself had sent a mass message. I didn't know. The caterers looked at me with pity when they brought out the food. Tables groaned under platters of lamb chops and grilled vegetables and towering cakes. There were bottles of wine opened, glasses poured, toasts unspoken. I took one plate, filled it, sat at the head table, and ate in silence. Forkful after forkful, I ate the wedding feast meant for 100 people. Alone. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and the third slice of cake, numbness settled into my bones like an old, familiar ache. I stopped thinking about Amanda. I stopped thinking about the guests, the embarrassment, the money. I just sat, there in my tailored suit, my tie loosened, my eyes empty, chewing mechanically under the chandeliers that swung gently from the weight of the storm outside. The venue coordinator, a kind woman named Teresa, approached me after a while. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should offer condolences or just leave me to drown quietly in my humiliation. "Would you like us to pack some of this up for you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it burst out of me, loud and broken and sharp as glass. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. I could feel tears slipping down my face, but they weren't sad tears anymore. They were something else, something unhinged. Teresa backed away slowly, nodding, murmuring something about packing up the meals. Later, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot with 6 containers of gourmet food and 3 unopened bottles of wine stacked in the passenger seat. Rain lashed against the windshield. I watched it for a long time, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, not knowing where to go or what to do next. When I finally got home, the first thing I saw was the catering invoice on my counter, the one I had sent to Amanda. My heart twisted. I walked over, picked it up, stared at it again. The numbers were all still there, cold and precise. $8,952.36. I grabbed a pen and circled the total 3 times, pressing so hard the ink bled through the paper. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into a new envelope, and wrote her name across the front one more time, even though I had no address to send it to. It felt like a ritual, a sealing. Days passed, then a week, then another. Life moved on around me like I was underwater. The florist called to ask about returning the vases. The DJ wanted payment in full, even though he had only set up and played 2 songs. The photographer sent me a half-finished gallery of empty chairs and untouched centerpieces, asking if I still wanted the rest. I deleted the email without answering. Kyle showed up one night, unannounced. He knocked, then used the spare key I'd given him 6 months ago when we were still planning bachelor parties and poker nights. He didn't say anything when he saw me. Just handed me a six-pack and sat down beside me on the couch. We drank in silence. At some point I told him everything. The unanswered calls, the empty apartment, the postcard, the invoice. His face stayed tight and still the whole time. When I finished, he leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "She's a coward," he said finally. His voice was low and furious. "And you deserve better than that." I didn't answer. I didn't know what I deserved. All I knew was that the world felt wrong now, off balance and dangerous. The following weekend, my parents insisted I come over for Sunday dinner. It was a tradition I hadn't missed in years, and skipping it would only make them worry more. I went, wearing jeans and a hoodie, feeling like a teenager who had crashed his father's car. Mom hugged me too long at the door. Dad patted my shoulder. In that awkward way he reserved for moments too big for words. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and mashed potatoes. For a few hours I almost felt normal. After dessert, Mom handed me a letter. No envelope, just a folded piece of lined paper. My name was written across the top in Amanda's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The letter was short. Just a few sentences. "I'm sorry. I couldn't do it. I wasn't strong enough. I didn't know how to tell you without destroying everything. Please know that I loved you. Please don't hate me." No explanation. No return address. No hint of where she was or if she ever planned to come back. Just those pitiful scraps of guilt and regret, scribbled in blue ink. I stared at the letter until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Then I folded it back up and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Later that night, alone in my apartment again, I pulled out the catering invoice one last time. I looked at the number circled 3 times. $8,952.36. I opened my laptop. I created a Venmo request. I attached a photo of the invoice. I sent it to the only account still linked to her name. "Since you ghosted, it's only fair you pay your share." It wasn't petty anymore. It was survival. It was claiming back a piece of myself she hadn't managed to steal. 3 days passed after I sent the Venmo request. I checked the app obsessively, refreshing the screen like it was a lifeline. Nothing. No response, no payment. Just the mocking silence of a ghost who had once been the center of my world. I began to think it was over, that I'd never hear from her again, never get even the satisfaction of a reply, of acknowledgement, of reparation. And then, on the 4th morning, the notification came. Amanda had paid the full amount. No message, no explanation, no emojis, just a green checkmark beside the words "paid," $8,952.36, and her profile picture, a photo of her at a vineyard, taken a year ago on a trip we had taken together. I stared at the screen, waiting for the feelings to crash into me. But they didn't. There was no rush of vindication, no fire of anger, just a dull ache, a silence louder than anything I'd known. She had paid the bill, and somehow that was more heartbreaking than if she had ignored it. It was a confirmation, a receipt not just for the food and wine and chairs, but for the end of everything. A receipt for the love I thought we shared, stamped and signed and cleared. That night I poured myself a drink, not out of sadness or rage, but because rituals help. I sat on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like her lavender detergent, and watched the city breathe below me. I remembered the night I proposed. We were in her favorite bookstore, hidden in the poetry aisle. I had tucked the ring inside a copy of The Sun and Her Flowers. She cried when she found it, said yes through a kiss. She had held my face like I was the only real thing in the world. Was that love real? Or just a performance, like the rest? The next day, I started packing away the wedding remnants. The framed engagement photos came off the walls. The RSVP cards went into the trash. The guest book, never signed, was donated. I listed the champagne flutes online. I sold the tuxedo. I kept the ring, though. I couldn't bring myself to pawn it. It sat in the back of my sock drawer, heavy as guilt. Time passed, as it does. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped waking up in cold sweats. The ache didn't vanish, but it changed shape, became a scar instead of a wound. Something I could touch without bleeding. One afternoon I got coffee with Sarah. She looked thinner, older, like the stress of Amanda's disappearance had carved something permanent into her face. She apologized for how she'd hung up that night. I told her there was nothing to forgive. Over lattes, she told me Amanda had reached out. Just once. Oh, short email. Said she was in Spain trying to find herself. No details, no forwarding address. She asked Sarah not to tell me. But Sarah had waited months, and guilt had a way of wearing her down. "She's not coming back, Liam," she said, her voice soft, not unkind. I nodded. I already knew. I saw Amanda once, nearly a year later. I was walking through Bryant Park in the fall, the leaves tumbling around like bits of gold. She was across the square, sitting on a bench, wrapped in a red coat, reading. She looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened. She didn't smile. Neither did I. We stared for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to recognize each other, short enough not to open anything old and bleeding. Then she looked down at her book. I walked away. I never looked back. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of our laughter in the apartment. I still remember how her hair smelled when it was damp from the shower. I still think about the life we almost had. But I've learned that love can rot in silence, and sometimes the people who promise forever are just practicing how to leave. Amanda ghosted me 2 weeks before our wedding, but I sent her the catering bill, and she paid it. That, I've come to realize, was her confession, her apology, her goodbye, and it was enough.